Well, hello people, and welcome back to some more City Skylines 2 coverage. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's time for the fourth developer diary, this one focusing on zones and signature buildings, and there is some very interesting things that is unveiled in this one. So let's dive straight into it, shall we? We'll have a look at the video together, and then of course the blog afterwards.
Every decision you make weaves a thread into the fabric of your city. But don't for a second imagine a smooth, seamless surface. Cities don't work like that. Instead, it's an urban patchwork marked by the realities of life and living. You'll create and stitch it together with zoning. Zoning lets you decide where people live and work. You create these residential, commercial, and industrial zones with zoning tools. They work in a...
So they're showing us some of the zoning tools here. See, residential now has 6 different options, which are covered later on in the video, which is very exciting.
Couple of different ways. Click and drag over cells on the map to zone large rectangles.
So this isn't anything new. We know about our zoning tools. You've got the paint bucket individually painting out individual squares, or sort of mass zoning all in one go. There's not anything particularly new here.
Rectangular areas. Zone all adjacent cells with one click. Or get granular, zoning a neighborhood cell by cell. When you establish a city, you choose.
So this here is interesting. For the first time, we see the main menu in the game, and you may notice that there are paradox mods here. Now, this could be a reason to get excited for a few reasons. Mainly because we have Mixergy and Cuboid, the makers of Node Controller, Insertion Marking Tool, and Move It, actually working for Colossal Order now. Or this could just be where our unlimited oil and ore, or unlimited soil for terraforming is kept under paradox mods. Or does this mean that Paradox are going to be a little bit more involved in the modding scene this time, away from the Steam Workshop? Not sure, but interesting that it is listed on the main menu.
When you establish a city, you choose.
And this is really cool here as well. For the first time, we get a look at our starting maps. We have the Archipelago Haven, Barrier Island, Great Highlands, Lakeland, Mountain Village, River Delta. It looks really cool. I've been trying to desperately pick out which map $2 has been playing on for, obviously, the footage that's been recorded for New Dollarton. I'm not sure which one it is, so let me know which one you think $2 was playing on here. It's kind of hard to pick out, isn't it, from those thumbnails? But we do get a little description of the map as well. You know, a chain of islands enveloped by water. The theme that it also falls under, but this theme can be changed. We also get a climate as well, with a little stormy rain cloud there too. That the fact that it's in the northern hemisphere, with a 16% buildable area. Of course, we know that before. Outside connections, power is now listed as an outside connection because of course we now know that we can export those resources. And natural resources, they've got wheat, trees, ore and oil as well, which is all very cool things that we used to though. But really nice to see for the first time all of the maps laid out.
Choose a map. The map's theme dictates if your city's buildings will have a North American or European architectural style. You can now use zoning tools to mix it up. Go on, sprinkle a little North American flair into your European city, or vice versa.
So we get the confirmation there that you can mix and match the themes. It's not locked into one style once you go into it, which was the case in Cities 1. You know, if you're playing on a map that is a European theme, then you're kind of locked into that European theme. You've got to specialise a district to get away from it, so hopefully that seems to be a little less restrictive now in Cities 2.
Okay, you know how zoning tools work, but what can you zone? Well, let's start with residential zones.
Great shot here as well, some of the low density residential, much more nicer assets, aren't they? A little shed here with a sun lounger in the back garden, a little Finnish flag there as well, obviously a little reference to Colossal Order. But really happy with this low density residential. It looks much nicer, doesn't it?
The places and spaces where citizens relax with friends, raise families, and rest their heads night after night. There are now 6 residential zone types. 2 will be familiar: low density housing, detached houses for single families.
Some really nice shots here as well of more of the low density residential, more Finnish flags, and well, looks like a snowman in someone's front garden as well. But confirmation that we'll be seeing the return of low density and high density again.
Families and high density housing, tall towers packed with residents.
Again, nice little shot of some of the high density here, much nicer looking, more realistic assets, aren't they? Also seem to be quite a bit taller as well than the ones we used to in City Skylines 1.
New zoning types include medium density row housing.
So a new zoning type includes medium density row housing, which is very cool. We can also see a for sale sign out the front here as well, which is cool. Does that mean we're going to be seeing Sims move to different houses across the city?
and medium-density apartment buildings. There's low rent housing now.
And medium density apartment buildings and the confirmation of low rent housing as well.
Now too. Huge apartment buildings with tiny apartments.
So that low rent housing is going to come in the form of huge apartment buildings with small apartments. So essentially the classic tower block, almost state housing. Really cool to see that residential has now expanded into 6 different zoning types. It's going to give us much more flexibility in how we actually increase our populations. I'm incredibly happy to hear this.
Finally, there's mixed housing. Here, residents live in apartments above ground floor shops.
And look at that. Of course, we've had this confirmed already. But seeing it for the first time, some mixed use zoning, which is absolutely massive, something that the city's community has been screaming for a very long time. So happy to see that that's baked into the base game of vanilla CS2.
Mixed housing adds next-level realism because homes and shops rub elbows like most real-world city centers. Ready to talk business? You'll create dedicated commercial zones where companies sell the locally produced and imported goods people need and want. Your commercial zones are also where citizens and
Really liking all the billboards here as well. There's much greater variation and they're much more realistic as well. Not nearly as much pink octopi, which is big thumbs up.
tourists eat out, catch the latest blockbuster, and
Got crap fish granules here as well. Not entirely sure what that referring to, but more billboards, nice to see.
dance until dawn. You'll establish industrial.
So we're seeing some industrial zoning here for the first time. Looks like we've got one of these bucket teeth excavator drills here that we saw from the Industries DLC, now factored into a vanilla CS2 industry area, which is nice.
Zones with factories, workshops.
Look at some of this industrial shots here as well. One thing I'm really liking is how much bigger the industrial units appear to be, especially in one of the shots that's coming up.
And warehouses where businesses can.
I look at that. Oh yeah, like she's thick, absolutely massive. This is what CS1 was really missing. Something that the unique factories kind of helped with from the Industries DLC. But this is something I felt was really missing from CS1 was this really thick, chunky industrial infrastructure. Let's look at the size of this beast. Absolutely huge. Really cool to see. I'm really, really happy to see these big, chunky industrial infrastructures coming in.
Store goods ready for distribution or export.
Another great shot here as well. Loads more industrial infrastructure to just absorb and bask in. So much better than vanilla CS1 industry, isn't it?
You'll also develop office zones. Here you'll find small, low-density buildings with only a
We get a little shot of some of the office zoning here as well, some of the low density stuff. It's nice again, much more realistic looking office park buildings, aren't they?
few businesses in operation. You'll also get the glittering high-density towers that define your city's silhouette in the sky.
And then we get some really nice shots here of some of the high density office stuff as well. Nice to see that we can generate proper towers from regular zoning now rather than having to rely on unique buildings.
Growing your city and zoning go hand in hand. Here's an example. You zone residential areas that boost the population, and with it, the demand for jobs. You respond.
Oh my god. So this right here is the best. This is the best thing so far that has been confirmed for CS2. This is better than all of the road tools put together. Drawable fields, everyone. We can see here that they are moving the nodes around to create the shape of the field, which is absolutely incredible. Just so good. Absolutely. Can't express how happy I am. The fact that we can now have custom fields, that's going to make building farmlands so much better. Over the moon to see that.
By creating an industrial zone with factories where people get to work. Now,
and look at those fields over there as well, right? All custom shapes and sizes, barns in the middle of them, farmhouses, just incredible. Majorly happy egg that we now have drawable fields confirmed in CS2.
These factories produce goods, but they won't stay in business long without somewhere to sell them. You solve that problem by expanding commercial zones.
So this is just kind of touching on what we know from CS1 is that there's the, supply and demand chain. You either import goods or produce them locally via industrial zones, and then it gets moved to commercial, and then the residents will buy them. Pretty similar to CS1. There's nothing massively changed there, I don't think.
You see? Each zone helps create the momentum you need to realize the city of your dreams. And it wouldn't be the city of your dreams without signature buildings. These are unique residential, commercial, industrial, and office buildings that you unlock as your city expands.
So, based on what they say here, it sounds like signature buildings are replacing unique buildings. However, this is quite good because they seem to give buffs to the city, whereas in Cities Skylines 1, unique buildings are just kind of essentially massive parks that just draw tourists. It now seems that the signature buildings tie into each of the zone types and almost give a buff to the city as you unlock them, which makes them much cooler. It gives them much more purpose, I guess, so I'm happy to see that.
They're free to build, and you can plot.
Although they are free to build, it seems a little weird, but we can see here, you know, same logo and icon again that shows that only one of them can be built, and then they're split down into the four separate zoning types again as well. But cool, nice to see some big chungus buildings here.
Them anywhere. It's City Skylines lingo. Go on, say it.
So it's nice to have a bit of plopping banter, I guess, isn't it?
What's so special about signature buildings? Well, they function like any zoned building. A home for people, a warehouse for industry, an office for workers. But they can elevate the neighborhood in unique ways. Signature buildings can also bring citywide benefits. Zone and place your signature buildings carefully so each city district flourishes and plays its part in the success of the whole city. Life's rich tapestry has never been richer than.
And look at that shot there as well. Oh, absolutely gorgeous, isn't it? Look at all the light reflections on the water. Just incredible. You know, we look at how base game vanilla CS1 looked. It was pretty awful when it came out. And then you look 8 years later, after all the visual mods that we had, to get it to look how we want. Just look how much further ahead CS2's visuals are starting. It just kind of makes the mind boggle and wonder, doesn't it, as to what we could possibly get CS2 to look like once we do get some mods coming out for visuals. Very exciting, but even the base game, look at the water reflections with light. So good. It looks amazing.
City Skylines 2.
And fabulous. That is indeed the video. So let's dive now into the blog and we'll see if there's anything to unpick in there. Okay, so let's have a little move through the blog together. So it starts off talking about our zoning tools, which of course haven't really changed from CS1, so pretty familiar territory for us here. It also talks about dezoning simplified, no longer has a separate tool for dezoning. Although it does seem to say that, you know, you can now use the right mouse button, and changing zone type is also easier and faster, as it no longer requires you to first dezone the previous zone type before adding a new one. This was in CS1, I don't know, it almost seems this is being pushed as a new feature, but you could right mouse button zones away in CS1 as well. So it touches on architectural themes. As a new feature, the zoning tools are able to zone buildings from different architectural themes. Of course, we've had European and American confirmed at the minute. I would hope that maybe in a DLC, or a content creator pack, or maybe even mods down through the Steam Workshop, that we're going to get more than just North American and European. Japanese would be incredibly cool to see, of course, very distinctive infrastructure and buildings. So maybe that will come later on. We're going to get more themes than just these two. But when starting a new city, the first option to choose is the theme for the city, and this will dictate the building's visual style. Street markings and roadside props, as well as the looks of service vehicles, will all change based on what theme you're playing with. That's really cool. We mentioned a couple of dev diaries ago that some of the traffic lights look very American, and it looks like they are going to change now. Street markings and roadside props will all shift with the theme, so big thumbs up for that. Happy to see that that's factored in. And here we get a nice side-by-side example of North American row houses compared to European row houses. They're pretty distinctively different, aren't they? I like that there's two different themes here. And the fact that we can mix and match as well is going to lead to some very sort of interesting designs, I think. So now we get on to our new zone types, which is really interesting. So of course, we're all familiar with low and high density housing. That's what we've been playing with for 8 years. But now we have the medium density row housing that are wall-to-wall homes, which is what we're seeing here. We've also got medium density housing with apartment buildings, and then the mixed use housing as well, which we've seen with shops on the bottom floor, and then the low rent housing with large apartment buildings, which are essentially, well, what that means to me is, you know, they're kind of the classic tower blocks, kind of state-funded housing. So cool to see that it's been split down into like 6 different types of residential zoning now. That's really cool. Some more really great shots here as well, some of the housing. Really cool to see. Just, you know, you compare that to CS1's vanilla residential, night and day. Really happy to see the direction they've taken it. Look at all this detail as well in the backs of the gardens, parasols, sheds, little tables, fences, flowers, just so much detail in the back gardens there. Really cool. So interesting here that the cost of living is usually higher in smaller buildings such as detached houses and row houses. And then increasing land value also affects smaller buildings more as it affects the size of the rent in general. On the other hand, high density housing can fit a lot of people into a small area, but its main negative aspect is that the apartments are usually small. So interesting that the land value is now going to have a direct effect on people's rent, which means they're going to have to be much more careful with land value. I think so if you're increasing it too much in an area where Sims aren't going to be able to afford to live there, you could end up really crippling that part of the city, I guess, based on kind of how they've worded this. And then our mixed use housing seeks to bring a much more realistic feel to the game. Really happy with that. I'm hoping at some point we're going to get some information on the reworking of the noise pollution mechanic, because essentially creating mixed use in Cities Skylines 1 would just result in people whinging about noise pollution, you know, having residential and commercial right next to each other. But I'm guessing now it's going to be split differently between the residential types, isn't it? So low density will still probably have a much lower noise pollution tolerance compared to either mixed use or some of the medium density residential housing now. But really hoping for some information on the noise pollution mechanic. I really didn't like the way it worked in CS1. Interesting here that commercial businesses pay a portion of the rent for mixed housing, which causes the rent for the households to be more affordable. That's really cool. And some more really nice shots of them here as well. All the shops on the bottom floor, apartments above. Really cool. I really like the way that these mixed use assets look. So now we come into commercial zones, which feature low and high density, which is what we are used to. And companies will sell manufactured goods which have been produced locally or imported from outside connections, very similar to CS1 again. This includes everything from cars and groceries to clothes and paper products. They also provide citizens with leisure options in the form of restaurants, movie theatres, bars, hotels and more. It's interesting that CS2 seems to be differentiating its goods and entertainment values quite specifically here. It's not like we're getting leisure and tourism sort of districts anymore. It's like it's all just split into different types of commercial business. And commercial zones thrive close to residential areas, as of course they provide them with customers. So this is interesting that the major difference between low and high density, apart from their physical size, are the types of companies as well as the volume of goods that they are able to sell to consumers. Low density businesses are usually boutiques, gas stations, small stores and bars, while the high-density businesses tend to be supermarkets, department stores, and various recreational locations such as theatres and hotels. So again, like we just said earlier, doesn't seem to be, you know, if you want a load of bars somewhere now, you don't have to specialise it as tourism. It now just falls under low density, which is cool, I guess. Kind of worried maybe that's not going to give us as much control over some of our districts that we would like. You know, if I want a street that's packed with bars, does that mean I'm going to have to zone low density and then delete every commercial unit that isn't a bar? I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. We got a really nice shot of a gas station here as well. Of course, the gas has been confirmed as a mechanic during the public transport dev diary, where, you know, citizens will factor in the cost of gas into their commute. So nice to see a functional little gas station here. Looks really nice. Happy with that. Doesn't like we're going to have to design our own anymore. They are now functional, ploppable assets. And then goes on to say that commercial businesses will benefit from local manufacturing, I'm guessing over importing, because they will have quicker access to the goods that they are selling. Local manufacturers also benefit from nearby commercial companies as the transportation cost of the manufactured goods to the retailers are lower, allowing them to earn more profits per unit sold. It's really interesting that they seem to be, you know, splitting down the sort of supply and demand chain into this level of detail. But I'm really interested just to see how that actually feels and translates into the gameplay. Is it something you're really going to notice, or once you've got your industrial and commercial set up, they're just going to start passing goods back and to each other? Again, I'm a little bit skeptical about that until we kind of actually see it in action. But still, cool that they seem to be going to this level of detail now with the supply and demand chain. So industrial zones now, they are divided into manufacturing companies and warehouses, which is very nice. We know we've had few comments as well on previous dev diaries hoping that warehouses are going to make a return, which they seemingly are. Manufacturing encompasses most of the industrialised zones as factories and workshops, while warehouses appear here and there, answering to the needs of different companies and their production processes. Warehouses will store produced goods that are ready to be shipped further, but are still waiting for transport or suitable buyers, which is cool. So we are able to store goods in warehouses as we were with the industry's DLC in CS1. So industrial zones attempt to sell goods to local buyers first. If there is an overproduction of a type of goods, the companies will ship the excess production to an outside connection, but selling to the local market is always more profitable due to lower transportation costs. Continuing to sell to outside connections will further decrease the profit as they have to ship the goods further and further to new buyers, simulating the eventual oversaturation on the market. Companies in general seek to reevaluate their business every now and then and adjust the number of employees to match the current business landscape and market needs. This is kind of cool, so really similar to real life, kind of import and export sort of logistics for that, these sort of companies have to deal with. So it's all cool saying this, but I need to see how it translates into the gameplay. Is it something that you're even going to notice when you're sat there playing Cities Skylines 2? Not sure, but again, it is cool that it's been this much fleshed out. So then we come on to office zoning, which is similar to commercial zones. They have two separate low and high density variations, one with small office buildings, high density, featuring glass-walled skyscrapers. So office companies convert technological goods manufactured in industrial zones into software and further into immaterial goods such as telecom, finance and media. Office zone companies include banks, electronic retailers, law firms, insurance companies and telecom communication companies. Software is an important type of immaterial goods for both the industrial and office sectors as they produce various goods. However, software in itself isn't sold to private customers. Other goods produced from software such as telecom and finance have a wider reach as private customers also benefit from them. Media is sold directly to citizens in the form of consumer electronics such as video games. So it's really interesting just to see how all of the different goods are being broken down now. We've had like food and bars mentioned in the commercial ones. Offices are now going to be producing telecommunications, finances and media, insurance, software. So, and then the consumers can buy it as video games. It's all really cool to see how they're all breaking it down. And I don't want to sound like I'm being too skeptical here, but again, how much are you actually going to notice that in the hour-to-hour gameplay of CS2? I need to see it. I need to play with it myself to see, or is it just going to be goods in general like it is in CS1, really? I don't know. It's cool to read it and to sort of think of the possibilities it could bring. But when I'm sat there playing CS2 and I see a truck leave from industrial zone to commercial zone, I'm not going to be like, oh my god, he's carrying food. Or is it just going to be, oh no, it's just another truck? I don't know. I need to see it. So we also now have a zone suitability info view as well, which as an example, zoning commercial areas shows information about where potential customers are located in the city, which is pretty cool. I like that. While zoning a residential area highlights ground pollution, so that's easier to avoid when zoning. Again, that's handy. Not something you tend to run into when you're experienced with CS, but definitely for noobs, this will certainly help out because a lot of people suffer with that ground pollution when they very first start playing the game, don't they? So now we come on to city growth, which is largely based on the different zone types needing more space and the symbiotic relationship between them. So new citizens move in and require housing, which thus increases residential demand. Those new people then need jobs and places to go shopping, spend their free time, which thus increases industrial and commercial demand. Pretty simple to follow. As industrial manufacturing increases, they need places to sell their produced goods, which increases commercial zone demand. And as companies are founded, more job positions become available, which in turn increases the demand for residential housing. So they're all tied in together, which is nice. I kind of got to the point in CS1 where I pretty much ignore my RCI demands and build whatever I want the city to look like. It seems now in CS2 that isn't going to be quite as possible anymore. You're going to have to pay much more attention to what the city actually needs because they're all kind of tied in with each other now. It'd be really interesting to see how that affects my playstyle because of course those that watch my channel know how we play. We'll build what we want rather than what the city tells us to. That could change, but we'll see. So adjusting taxes for the different education levels as well as the various goods produced and sold in the city can have a great effect on local demand. Taxes can be used to favour different goods and products manufactured in the city, or simply give a helping hand to fledgling industries, and we get a little information shot here. And here we get a little info breakdown of some of our demands. So medium density residential building has a negative impact on unoccupied buildings and availability of jobs, but has pluses for students, taxes and happiness. High density, again, pretty similar. Commercial demand has a plus for low-skilled labour availability, gas station availability, high-skilled labour, local demand, and taxes. So this is cool that we kind of get a little bit more of a breakdown of exactly what these demands are going to impact on the city. Again, that comes back to the point of how much is this going to affect my playstyle, because I really don't pay attention to RCI, but we'll find out, I guess. So now we come on to residential demand, which will increase when new citizens want to move in, citizens moving in for work, or students seeking education, or people simply wanting to move in because the city is an inviting location to raise their families. Families and seniors will prefer large apartments, thus increasing low and medium density housing demand. Single-person households and students don't shy away from smaller apartments, favouring medium-density apartment buildings and high-density residential towers. And the living costs are also divided amongst the high number of households. So it's just so much more in depth, isn't it? You know, different demographics of citizens preferring different things in the city. It's really cool to see. I really didn't think they'd go kind of this branching with the residential zonings and demographics of the Sims in the city. It's cool to see. And again, some more shots here of some low-density housing. Although I think these red cranes might be a little overkill to build some of these little trailer park-looking homes, but whatever. It's a cool little animation, I guess, isn't it? Residential zone demand also increases as jobs in the industrial, commercial, and office sectors become available, of course. Zones require a workforce, and as new workers move in, they demand suitable housing. When unemployment increases and jobs aren't available, residential demand decreases until the issues are remedied. If the city has a large number of built but unoccupied homes, residential demand can decrease until the available homes become occupied. So the stuff here on commercial and industrial demand is pretty self-explanatory. Now, it's based on manufacturers producing goods for sale and the availability of potential customers, as well as people needing jobs. When industrial zones produce goods, they need to sell them to make a profit. We've kind of covered this before in the video in the diary, haven't we? Some really nice high-density commercial buildings here as well. They're much nicer looking, aren't they? No more pink octopus, thank God. And it also looks like a little road barrier here in the corner as well, isn't it? I wonder what that could be. It's just out of shot, unfortunately, but looks like a little road divider, doesn't it, with a little fence on it. Quite nice. I want to know what that is, please. And then we come into industrial demand, which is based on citizens needing jobs in the manufacturing sector, as well as local commercial companies requiring goods and products to sell. So again, it's just sort of continually explaining the supply and demand chain that we're pretty familiar with. And here we get a shot of a pretty major industrial centre, don't we? This looks really cool over here. That looks like that big factory that we saw in the trailer. Lots of cool smokestacks as well. Work availability is one of the cornerstones of industrial demand. Attracting new citizens to the city directly affects the demands of various sectors, including industrial zones. As companies always seek to optimize their production, they are in search of suitable workers. As the companies increase in levels, their requirements to shift more educated employees, which in turn will lead to increased productivity and efficiency, which is always nice. So that's kind of cool. So when you obviously click on an industrial building in CS1, it shows you, you have uneducated up to highly educated. And then that's kind of it, you just have different levels of jobs to fill. But it would now appear that those education levels of the employees will lead to increased productivity and efficiency rather than just being a number, which is pretty cool. Manufacturing also benefits from having local warehouses to store produced goods and products. Companies tend to have relatively small storage facilities and seek to sell all their products as quickly as possible, of course, which warehouses will allow more flexibility and time to seek suitable new buyers if no one is currently available, while still keeping production going, which is nice. So warehouses seem to be much more embedded into the supply and demand chain now, don't they? Office demand is increased by citizens wanting to work in the office sector, as well as citizens and businesses needing the various immaterial goods that offices will produce. As software is produced, more office companies appear as they can further develop the software into other services, which is cool. We get a really cool shot here as well of what appears to be some of the high-density offices. Much nicer, aren't they? Really tall towers. This is what I wanted, Kind of felt the zoning in CS1 lacked a lot of height for the most part, granted maybe the exception of green cities, for example. But this is really nice, creating proper little financial business districts within the city now, just with zoning, is a big thumbs up in my opinion. So now we come into city specialization. Companies working with the same materials and producing similar products benefit from each other's proximity. Industries and offices concentrate on areas where similar companies already exist. They communicate with each other, which is cool, and have a better chance to hire specialized workers to increase their efficiency. As more and more companies produce the same type of goods or products, they gain a citywide specialization bonus, which increases their efficiency and thus their profit, which is cool. So now we come on to land value. So land value is a tool to understand which locations are desirable for citizens and companies, and it spreads through roads to the buildings, close neighborhoods, slowly increasing the value of the area in general. So the land value isn't something I really paid vast amounts of attention to in Cities Skylines 1. Might have been something I checked, I don't know, once every 10 hours or so, but didn't really affect my building decisions, and as a result, my cities never really were affected by it. For those that are following something like Orchid Bay, you know, how many times have we checked the land value? It's just not a mechanic that's really that important, I don't think, but maybe it will be for CS2. So citizens tend to value large homes, the proximity of shops, services they require, schools and workplaces, as well as pollution-free locations. If citizens find homes that suit their needs, they move in. If they are happy living there and are wealthy enough, they're able to pay a higher rent, which translates into an increase in the area's land value. It is important to note that simply plopping all services into a neighbourhood doesn't increase the land value in the area automatically, so that's changed from CS1 because you could basically just spam services and parks to increase land value, couldn't you? Only when residents and companies have their needs met, be it with services or shopping options for citizens, customers and resales for companies, will land value be affected as the residents and companies feel the area is viable to their existence. So it doesn't seem to be as cheesable anymore, I guess. You actually have to pay attention to what the people living there and working there need in order for the land value to go up. So to keep the land value in check if needed, you can adjust the various residential taxes, encouraging or discouraging citizens to move in. Zoning more of these zone types with high demand can help keep land value in check as the demand is met. It is possible to simply limit the number of required services and leisure options to keep land value low. Citizens can tolerate some shortcomings in regard to their needs and still live relatively happy lives. If citizens are not able or willing to pay high rent, the rent decreases, which also affects the land value around the building. Residents will move out if the living costs are too high, and if they don't feel like their needs are met in the area where they live, some will even move out of the city entirely. However, if residents continue to not be able to meet the rent costs, the building will start to deteriorate as no money is used to pay for the building's basic upkeep. The residents then move out in greater numbers and the building becomes abandoned. This further decreases the land value. Abandoned buildings can become occupied by homeless citizens, which is crazy, homeless people confirmed. But due to the constant disrepair, the building will eventually collapse, with the homeless people inside? Let's hope not. But really interesting mechanic. So if you continue to neglect that land value, the building will abandon, eventually become occupied by homeless citizens. So that's really interesting. That kind of makes it sound like you can't just delete them anymore because it will collapse. Otherwise, if it's just left unattended. Really interesting. Didn't expect homeless occupation to be in CS2. Really great shot here as well of New Donaldson, sort of outer-lying suburbia looking to that skyline. Looks really great, doesn't it? And then a note to say as land value increases, citizens prefer smaller homes so they can afford their rent. I don't know if that really makes sense. Surely as the land value goes up, the houses would become bigger and, you know, people would prefer larger homes, I guess, as the land value goes up. Maybe I'm just misreading that or misinterpreting it in some way, but I thought that would have been the opposite. I thought they would prefer larger homes as the land value increases. But I guess rent is a mechanic now, so not sure on that one. But here we go. So land value affects different residential zone types in different ways. Low density housing areas can quickly become expensive to live in as the land value increases. Okay, so I guess that's what this is referring to then. The higher land value also affects the rent, and since low density housing only has one household per building, the increased rent falls on the single household entirely. Thus, lower income families tend to move out of these residential areas and search for new homes in medium density housing areas. Okay, that makes sense then. And then companies will also evaluate suitable locations for their businesses, partially using land value and the size of the rent, which is subtracted from the value of the company's production. It's much more in depth now, isn't it, as to how land value ties in with people's needs and businesses' needs. Pretty crazy, actually. Really didn't expect any of this for CS2, to be totally honest. Companies pay for the transportation of materials to their location, as well as the transportation of produced goods and products from the company to resellers and customers. The lower the transportation costs, of course, the more suitable a location is for the company. Similar to residential housing, companies use any money left over from covering the building's upkeep costs to improve the building and eventually level it up. So leveling up buildings now doesn't seem to be tied to land value anymore. It would seemingly be based on the profits and amount of leftover cash that they have. So now we come on to talk about building levels. All zoned buildings have building levels through 1 to 5. Building levels represent the progression of the building from a lower to high quality building and a reflection of how wealthy its inhabitants are. As the building increases in level, its upkeep increases, which means that its rent also increases. In residential buildings, electricity and water consumption will also decrease per household as the building changes at levels 3 and 5. So that means it's going to basically change every other level then, doesn't it, I guess? So per household and the buildings change at levels 3 and 5. More apartments are available in medium and high density residential buildings. In commercial buildings, electricity and water used per 1 unit of goods or products sold will decrease. Furthermore, commercial buildings are able to produce goods and services faster, which means they can sell them cheaper to consumers. This leads to citizens choosing high-level commercial companies over other options. And then similarly, in manufacturing and office buildings, electricity and water used to produce 1 unit of goods will decrease. Higher level buildings adopt better utility practices, boosting their production efficiency and also generating less garbage and pollution. And then visually, buildings change at every other level. Yes, there you go, there's confirmation, representing the increase in the quality of the building. Lower level buildings have an intended cheaper look, while higher level buildings adopt a more modern and detailed look, which is nice. But cool to see that building levels seem to be kind of factored into the economy as well now. And then we come on to signature buildings. So zone types and demand covered, it's time to talk about signatures. These are a new feature in CS2 and I'm assuming have replaced unique buildings and can best be described as unique ploppable zoned buildings that fall into one of the 4 types of zoning. Each one has its own unlocking requirements, such as the Sculptor Mansion having 3 requirements. Reaching a certain progression milestone, attaining a specific citizen happiness level, and also having a number of cells zoned with low density residential housing. Once this has been met, the building becomes available and can be placed anywhere on the map, similar to service buildings. The building is unique and can be placed only once, but it's entirely free to build. It can be relocated just like any other ploppable building, and bulldozing it allows you to rebuild it again at a later date. And we get a little shot here of the residential signature building vary in size from mansions to medium density apartments to residential skyscrapers. But you can certainly tell them apart, can't you, these signature buildings? And it's nice that they're kind of blended in with each of the themes as well, so you can use them in and amongst that zoning. You know, a lot of the CS1 unique buildings are so kind of stark and almost abstract to the point that they really stand out and you kind of have to build something specifically around them. You can't really blend them naturally into the city. You think of something like the Cathedral of Plenitude from City Skylines 1 is like super distinctive looking, really hard to use. So signature buildings seem to be a lot more integratable, I guess, is the take-home point. Signature buildings function similar to regular zone buildings and contribute to the zone-based economic cycle, which is cool. A residential building welcomes new residents, while a commercial office or factory seeks a suitable business to occupy it. Same laws of success and failure affect the companies that we've seen up above in this diary. They also require a suitable workforce, compete for the same customers, and try to turn a profit to be successful. And we can see what looks to be kind of a big supermarket here that we saw plopped in the dev diary, didn't we? Really nice car parking out the front of it too. Nice to see much more realistic signature buildings now. I can't say uniques anymore, can I? They are signatures. So signature buildings allow you to build large commercial buildings, massive factories, or impressive offices, which function like your zoned buildings, which is really cool. You know, unique buildings in Cities 1, they were essentially just massive ploppable parks that drew locals and tourists to them per week, but they're now factored into the city's economy. Love that. So we can see here, each signature building also has 1 or more positive effects. These range from effects affecting the neighbourhood, citywide, some affect citizen well-being and city attractiveness for tourists, while others improve the city's industrial sectors or boost high-level education effectiveness. And we can see here that Coda Park is a modern office building where coffee gets converted into game design, art and code. It gives us a plus 1% office efficiency citywide, a plus 5% interest in university education, and then a plus 1% university graduation chance, and then a plus 5 to well-being within a 1 kilometer radius. So really cool. Something there that piqued my interest was an interest in university education rather than just a flat-out 5% boost in university education. It is interesting that it stipifies interest, I guess. Might be reading too much into that, but cool. But I really like the fact that signatures are involved in sort of the economy, not just parks anymore. Big thumbs up for that. And indeed, that does conclude today's development diary. Some really interesting things going on here. A lot of information to take in as well in terms of how the city's economy and life cycle is going to function now with all the different goods and different types of zoning that are contributing to your city's economy. Really interesting. For me, the confirmation of drawable fields is just the best. That's just made me so happy. I can't wait to get involved in some farm builds. Now we don't have to place these huge rectangle fruit fields or wheat fields just to get it in like we do in CS1. Really excited for that. Let me know what you think. As always, let's please keep that Cities 2 conversation going down below. Is there anything here that you're massively excited for? Or indeed, the other side of the coin, is there anything that seriously pissed you off and something that's been confirmed that you really didn't want to be confirmed? Let me know. Let's keep that conversation going down below. I'll, of course, try and reply to as many of you guys as I can. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day.
Every decision you make weaves a thread into the fabric of your city. But don't for a second imagine a smooth, seamless surface. Cities don't work like that. Instead, it's an urban patchwork marked by the realities of life and living. You'll create and stitch it together with zoning. Zoning lets you decide where people live and work. You create these residential, commercial, and industrial zones with zoning tools. They work in a couple of different ways. Click and drag over cells on the map to zone large rectangular areas. Zone all adjacent cells with one click. Or get granular, zoning a neighborhood cell by cell. When you establish a city, you choose a map. The map's theme dictates if your city's buildings will have a North American or European architectural style. You can now use zoning tools to mix it up. Go on, sprinkle a little North American flair into your European city, or vice versa. Okay, you know how zoning tools work, but what can you zone? Well, let's start with residential zones. The places and spaces where citizens relax with friends, raise families, and rest their heads night after night. There are now 6 residential zone types. 2 will be familiar: low-density housing, detached houses for single families, and high-density housing, tall towers packed with residents. New zoning types include medium-density row housing and medium-density apartment buildings. There's low-rent housing now too. Huge apartment buildings with tiny apartments. Finally, there's mixed housing. Here, residents live in apartments above ground-floor shops. Mixed housing adds next-level realism because homes and shops rub elbows like most real-world city centers. Ready to talk business? You'll create dedicated commercial zones where companies sell the locally produced and imported goods people need and want. Your commercial zones are also where citizens and tourists eat out, catch the latest blockbuster, and dance until dawn. You'll establish industrial zones with factories, workshops, and warehouses where businesses can store goods ready for distribution or export. You'll also develop office zones. Here you'll find small, low-density buildings with only a few businesses in operation. You'll also get the glittering, high-density towers that define your city's silhouette in the sky. Growing your city and zoning go hand in hand. Here's an example. You zone residential areas that boost the population, and with it, the demand for jobs. You respond by creating an industrial zone with factories where people get to work. Now, these factories produce goods, but they won't stay in business long without somewhere to sell them. You solve that problem by expanding commercial zones. You see? Each zone helps create the momentum you need to realize the city of your dreams. And it wouldn't be the city of your dreams without signature buildings. These are unique residential, commercial, industrial, and office buildings that you unlock as your city expands. They're free to build, and you can plop them anywhere. Plop. It's City Skylines lingo. Go on, say it. Plop. What's so special about signature buildings? Well, they function like any zoned building: a home for people, a warehouse for industry, an office for workers. But they can elevate the neighborhood in unique ways. Signature buildings can also bring citywide benefits. Zone and place your signature buildings carefully so each city district flourishes and plays its part in the success of the whole city. Life's rich tapestry has never been richer than in City Skylines 2.